This is the Week in Review. It is Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. I'm going to start with the most recent piece I put on the Liberty Chronicle, Mercenaries, Misinformation, and the Making of a Caribbean Conflict. Reports from the New York Post this week revealed a storm of covert maneuvering between Washington and Caracas. Venezuelan officials claim to have captured mercenaries tied to the CIA, allegedly plotting a false flag attack to justify escalations in the Caribbean. The United States, meanwhile, has been conducting large-scale military exercises near Venezuelan waters, deploying carrier troops and advanced fighter jets under the banner of counter-narcotics operations. There's also quite a few soldiers out there, right? At the same time, yet another Post story surfaced detailing how a former U.S. Homeland Security agent spent over a year trying to lure Maduro's personal pilot into betraying his leader, a plan that involved secret hangar meetings, persistent messaging, and the promise of millions. That effort underscores the growing willingness among American operatives to blur the line between diplomacy and espionage. Now, few will rush to defend the Maduro regime. It is authoritarian, corrupt, and hostile to liberty, but the reflex to trust our own government's narrative is a dangerous one, and history offers reminders too vivid to ignore. For example, in 1962, as many of us may know, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff approved Operation Northwoods, a plan that proposed staging or fabricating attacks on American citizens and military assets to justify a war with Cuba. Kennedy ultimately rejected it, but the document remains a chilling artifact of how far people who want power can reach. The vice president of Venezuela outright said that the United States is attempting to create a false flag against its own military personnel in order to rationalize, quote, justify an invasion of Venezuela. And right, like I say, it's not like that's just some great, honest government down there, but this is where we're at when, they could have just looked up basic history, knew about Operation Northwoods, and said, well, why not just say that? Why not say that they were going to do that? And Gulf of Tonkin and everything else. So, it's an interesting position to be in. Obviously, that's authoritarian government down there, but it's not like we don't have authoritarian government here. So when reports emerge of secret missions, clandestine bounties, and deniable mercenaries in foreign waters, skepticism isn't disloyalty. It's the duty of all free-thinking, freedom-loving individuals. Nations do not always erode through sudden pushes towards authoritarian tyranny. Lots of times they degenerate through slow habituation to tools of empire. If we're going to have this republic, it will only survive so long as its citizens demand proof before the drums of war begin to beat. On another note, Trump has ordered the military to prepare for possible action in Nigeria. Trump has directed the Defense Department to prepare for possible military intervention, citing the country's alleged inaction against the killing of Christians. The order, delivered Sunday via social media, warned that the U.S. could move in, quote, guns a-blazing if Nigeria fails to protect its Christian population. It's mind-blowing because they're blending religious sentiment into the operation of the state. Because this isn't so much number one, right? They didn't make just a humanitarian claim. No, they made a specific claim that they're massacring Christians, as opposed to any other religion or some other religion. And it'd be easy for them to say, well, they're not massacring those other people, so why would we bring that up? At that point, you are allowing your religion to bleed into the idea of government, which, of course, anarchists understand that those are basically the same thing. Government is a religion, but they're using attacks against Christians to rationalize potential military intervention. It's not like these people were American citizens, right? But they're in that position where it'd be easy to say, well, it doesn't matter if they're citizens or not. Shouldn't you condemn violence against innocent people? Yes. But for a nationalist movement to be concerned with non-citizens based on their religion is definitely kind of blurring these lines, flipping back and forth. They're basically turning government into an apparatus of their religion. To me, Trump was a little bit more crazy than your standard so-called American conservative. His trade controls he leaned too hard on. That was obviously nonsense. And then, of course, now he has given the government outright ownership stakes in corporation and Intel anyway, and then the golden share over U.S. Steel, which allows him to control aspects of production. while Trump was a little bit more extreme than what the conservatives have painted themselves up as being, it's just the logical conclusion of those nationalistic tendencies within the so-called conservative movement. And now the Christian nationalist tendencies, and now at this point we have gone into the imperialist socialist almost, right? Because domestically, Trump is basically a socialist. He's definitely not a free market capitalist. Economic nationalist, right? A national socialist, if you want to call it that, economic nationalist. And now, here they are using their religion as a way to get people to support foreign military intervention. So, as if it couldn't get any crazy, dangerous rhetoric. Now, they're basically doing the exact same things that they said that they were not going to do. So anyway, Secretary Hegseth publicly supported the president's message, of course, stating that the Department of War is preparing for action. Well, you were probably doing that before Trump even said this. Nigerian officials responded cautiously, saying they would welcome U.S. cooperation as long as it recognizes their territorial integrity. My statement in regards to that is just look at the words he's saying. Look what he said. He issued a warning. He issued an actual warning to this foreign government. So now it's like anytime that Donald Trump looks out at the world and he sees something that he thinks is an injustice, he's going to use the power of the government to make threats against foreign governments. And that is not a non-interventionist policy, right? So his whole campaign about anti-war, anti-intervention is all nonsense. And why wouldn't it be? Why would you expect a person who says things that he says and who does what he does and believes what he believes, allegedly, would be consistent? I've noticed a lot of people are circulating around Thomas Massie and are in Thomas Massie groups, and there's a lot of ex-MAGAs in there, and they're saying Trump is different, and he's really not. It's different, but it's just the logical conclusion of everything he said. The only things that he's really blatantly went back on were, right, the war propaganda, the Epstein files, and that's, as far as I can tell, that's about it. Those are the only things where he actually campaigned where we're going to do X and he is basically doing Y. Aside from the fact that he presents himself as a capitalist, a traditional American so-called conservative, which is more like a classical liberal is what they used to think they were. And he's basically just an economic nationalist, a collectivist, and so on. So he's not really different. This is just the logical conclusion of all of his rhetoric. In 2016, he said the government can't go broke can't default because it can print money. I mean, right there, he should have been laughed off the stage, right? Especially after so many years, Ron Paul's popularity, though they did work against him in the media and such, and of course the GOP worked to sabotage him. There's a pattern here, right? The same administration once campaigned on promises to end, quote, endless wars, now seems eager to stretch American power into yet another entanglement. Very eager, issuing warnings. And what's a warning without the threat of force? It's just hollow. The moral pretext, protecting the innocent, that remains familiar, but it's one that has too often been used to justify missions without clear objectives or limits. And the objective is kind of obvious, but right, what's the limit? Where does the limit end? And that Ron Paul had a quote recently. It's basically saying if this president can do it, then the next president can do it. And that's where we're going. It's setting dangerous precedents here, which at this point the MAGAcrats have completely disavowed what the United States form of government was supposed to be. They make excuses for these guys all the time on how they're circumventing long-established tradition and altering this and altering that, which, I mean, these individuals don't really even understand the basics of market economics and limited government. So their entire belief system is simply leaning on state power at this point to control the world. Venezuela, and now Nigeria, Brazil, just complete China, gibberish, which you can see manifest exactly in just how he's putting tariffs on. He's taking tariffs off. He's putting them back on. He's taking them off again. He's a flip-flopper, they used to call that. Trump's the biggest flip-flopper we've had in 60 years. And the reason that is because he doesn't actually have any philosophy. And he's just going with whatever he thinks is going to get him power, which most politicians do. Most voters are very, very inconsistent because, voting is not about having a concrete, well thought out, rational philosophy. That is not what government is. Government is the appeal to authority, quite literally, and the appeal to force. It's the belief that force is the only way to solve whichever problem. Because when you invoke government at that point, you are invoking force. You think that the point that what should be done is force should be used. So the uncomfortable truth in this moment is that every intervention, no matter how righteous the cause, further entwines the United States in global conflicts that it cannot control. A president who once mocked the notion of being the world's policeman, and a whole movement that once were leery of that idea, now brandishes the badge himself. Utter hypocrisy, and they keep hitting them with it too. It's not like we couldn't go a week or two without this guy calling out and issuing warnings to some other state. This is the problem with people who want to be the world police, authoritarian zealots. I'm reminded of a quote from Samuel Adams, if I'm remembering correctly. I will look it up and put it in there. But he's basically saying that it's more important to focus on innocence being protected than punishing wickedness, because there's no end to wickedness, right? And the way that I'm incorporating that here is just an authoritarian zealot will never be short of wrongs to right in the world, because there's a lot of bad things that go on in the world. And when your mentality is basically pray to government power and brandish the badge of the world policeman and the guns and the tanks and the nuclear bombs, it's a dangerous mentality. Because, there's no shortage of evil in the world. An authoritarian will always find another reason why he should have power and why he should use force against XYZ for whatever reason. And now their religious sentimentalities are overruling the entire concept of citizenship. I'm arguing this from what the nationalist logic would imply, and what they themselves imply when they speak about how they hate illegal aliens and they're thieves and they say people in other countries don't have the same rights as us, and somebody told me the other day that our natural rights are for Americans. It's like that, and that statement is just complete and utter gibberish from a person who's never actually studied these concepts, but wants to come around and tell all of us what freedom and liberty are, right? So, but the point is just that for a nationalist movement, these people aren't even citizens. It's one thing for the government to say some of our citizens have been taken hostage by some terrorist organization. Now, Donald Trump is just issuing warnings to other governments for not protecting its own citizens based on those citizens sharing the same religion. So at that point, their religion is transcending the state's line. But yeah, it's just, I find it interesting how they're mixing this all together and blending, and they have the ebb and the flow going between the state, so-called proper secular state, as secular as it possibly could be anyway, versus outright religion of Christianity. The fact that he's pandering to Christians and literally using murder as a poker chip, just as he used Ross Ulbricht's life as a poker chip to try to get the libertarians to vote for him. Of course, a lot of those knuckleheads were nationalists that the Mises Caucus brought in, so they were going to probably vote for him anyway. But just the level of disrespect for all of us and human life in general, for this politician to go up there and try to use the murder of Christians who are not American citizens. But again, not like that necessarily matters. That doesn't matter from my perspective. Right? Violence is violence. But for their perspective, to claim this nationalist, also non-interventionist, which of course that was thrown out the window basically as soon as he got elected the second time, because they were, he bombed Iran and everybody was just cheering for it. So, and then, of course everything else has been going on. Pretty much every, martial action that he has taken, they have supported without question. The MAGA-crats have. Bombing these 10 boats so far, increasing the presence in Venezuela, bombing Iran. Now this, I'm sure there's plenty of MAGA-crats out there that are just all about this because they're killing Christians. So now we need to intervene, because how could you ever compete with that, right? Though the state does a good job, but for the state to be invoking Jesus and Christians in official rhetoric, more or less, and then issuing warnings to other governments over them killing Christians, really didn't even have to call them Christians to make the point, right? They're killing innocent people. They're committing atrocities over there, which may be true. to, not even just this case, but any case, like just the statement itself, they're committing atrocities over there. That may be true. That's all you really need to say. The only reason you bring the Christianity into it is to pander to a crowd of people with murder, which is exactly, as I said, what he did when he came to the Libertarian Convention and basically got booed off the stage. I was happy with, but it didn't end up helping in the election. But I was because I was leery about that whole thing because it was obvious that the Mises Caucus and Angela McArdle were nonsense. So I was like, what's really going to happen for this? But I was glad to see a lot of people out there. They weren't falling for that nonsense. They booed him heavily when he started running that nonsense. And that's just my point to that, though, is that, again, he's using people's lives as bargaining chips with people and as emotional ploys to mess with people's religion, to mess with people's emotions based on their religion, to get them to be more accepting of military intervention in foreign states. I mean, what else could you possibly say that is? He just genuinely cares. Well, that's not exactly, he issued a warning to them. So it's just, even if he genuinely cares, his mentality is warmonger. World police, right? What else can you say? And now, of course, everybody I'm sure has heard, it's also been kind of reversed, but a federal judge in Rhode Island had ordered the U.S. Department of Agriculture to release money for the SNAP program amid an ongoing so-called government shutdown. The ruling requires the USDA to issue its $6 billion contingency fund to ensure that food benefits continue to reach recipients, warning that any delay could cause irreparable harm. A similar case in Massachusetts reached a near identical conclusion, stating that the government cannot suspend SNAP payments simply because of budgetary shortfalls. Of course, that's kind of nonsense, though it only makes sense in the fact that they have this contingency fund. Interestingly, it said that the contingency fund cannot be tapped unless the SNAP system itself was funded. So it's like they're saying that it cannot be tapped simply because of a lack of funding, which is just, well, what does that mean then? So basically, you would have to have said that the SNAP program was running smoothly and then like a disaster hit that made people need SNAP more. But, if you look at these charts from Fox News, it seems kind of like that's what happened, right? We kind of had a so-called disaster here because if you look at the numbers that went up in 2020, it's like, well, we all know what that's about, right? So I'd say that might, you can maybe argue that we're still recovering from that, right? So, and it's just utter hypocrisy anyway, because they're blowing people up every day in the ocean. And they're sending $40 billion down to Javier Milei, who pretends to be an anarchist, pretends to be a libertarian. Was obvious that he wasn't because he was running around during his campaign with a picture of a $100 bill with his face on it. So it's like, okay, how about a gold coin, buddy? That might have been. Thankfully, they're stupid again, right? They're stupid, or I don't know. Maybe they're not as stupid as I think. When you hear Trump ramble, it's easy to think he's stupid. When you hear Kristi Noem ramble and Pram Bondi ramble and Kash Patel especially, I think Trump and Kash are probably the most idiotic out of the whole gang up there. But when you listen to these people babble, it's easy to think that they're stupid, but they might not be because he sure enough got elected down there, running around with his face on a $100 bill because he made the economic argument that, the dollar's worth more, so this would be a better trade-off. And regardless, what's even better trade-off than that is free banking, free money, in the sense of not regulated by the state, not managed by the state, of course, right? Sound money, gold, hard money, free market money system. The government has no business in that. Money is a market phenomenon. And we, as libertarians and as anarchists, understand that. And Javier Milei pretends to understand that, and maybe he does, but then either way, he goes on and he campaigns on dollarizing the economy, while we are up here trying to abolish the Federal Reserve. So, yeah, definitely working against us in that situation, I would say. Now, I'm not overlooking the hypocrisy of this situation, but underneath the humanitarian argument, there's another question about the extent of congressional and judicial authority. Each emergency ruling expands the precedent for the courts to redirect or reallocate funds beyond the normal legislative process, And when the courts compel spending from contingency reserves or wherever else, they're affirming immediate relief, but they are reinforcing the drift of the power of the purse away from Congress. In this case, it's just going to the courts, but as opposed to the executive. But really, the point being is that we're in this weird situation where the government itself is basically, going after each other at varying levels, kind of devouring itself from within. And that's, it's dangerous for us in the sense that, like with the example of the airports now, air travel is being affected by this because these knuckleheads are fighting over nonsense. They got no problems sending billions and billions abroad, but apparently they can't come to an agreement. Like, it's just mind-blowing to me that Trump would give 40 billions away to a foreign state. Not give it away, quote, invest. Force us to invest in the lying IMF World Bank shill Javier Milei and his fraudulent so-called libertarian state. Force us to invest in that, but then bitch and moan and gripe over illegal aliens. Right? Like, Argentinians aren't U.S. citizens. Why are you giving them money? It's just total nonsense. And these MAGA-crat Republicans, nationalist boobs, keep falling for this. Like, obviously I'm against government welfare, but this is not what's happening. They still got plenty of money to blow people up and give to Argentina and whatever else they're going to subsidize. So this is not that being this some libertarian so-called movement. Something I spoke about last time was Bovino was ordered by a judge to check in every single day about use of force incidents and what Bovino and Homeland Security and such did in Operation Midway Blitz. But then we have Federal Appeals Court ruling that Border Patrol Bovino does not have to attend daily meetings with the judge to discuss federal immigration's use of force. So again, just more tension between various sectors of the government going after each other. So I guess we'll see how that one's going to play out and what's going to happen if he doesn't obey, and what are the courts going to do? I mean, they have the marshals. I'm not sure if the U.S. Marshals would enforce that on National Guard and DHS and whatnot. So again, it's interesting to watch these people go at each other's throats. But it's dangerous for us because in the meantime, all of the services that we're running, and I'm not even talking about welfare, like I said, because obviously philosophically I'm opposed to state welfare, I'm opposed to the state, period. So, taxation is coercion, so we shouldn't be using coercion to get things done. But going back to the Milei thing for a minute, Sean Duffy, Transportation Secretary, he said this past Tuesday that, efforts to find funds failed. There's not a lot of leeway we have to get people paid, he said. He urged Congress to reopen the government. And I just want to draw attention to this, that it says here that it takes $500 million a month to fund the FAA air traffic controllers. And again, $40 billion has been, quote, invested in Argentina. That's 80 months of FAA pay. So much for MAGA, America First, Patriot, our citizens, our citizens, our citizens. No, they don't care about any of that. They care about Nigerian citizens, if they're Christian, and whatever other nonsense they're going to pull out of their ass to try to get people to accept foreign military involvement. And it is just mind-blowing, honestly, at how far. And because like I said, it's not like we couldn't even go 2 weeks without yet another state that he's going after here. He's been meddling with Venezuela. It's just constant bombardment of war propaganda and the evils in the world, and we need to be the world police and all this nonsense that he ran against, and that Republicans, claim the Democrats are warmongers, and that's true. But now look at what they're doing. I mean, it's, that's the whole thing. If you fell for Trump, you're a fool to begin with. But if you're still supporting him after he's clearly a hypocrite, then you're just indoctrinated, almost to the point of no hope. Because the things these people are saying are completely insane. And the things that they're doing are, number one, they're not, quote, America First. They're not, quote, MAGA, right? Like, make Argentina great again because, in the future it'll bring more prosperous trade. Well, in the present, you got your own, quote, citizens about to have their government assistance shut off. They can't, the airports can't facilitate travel, but they've got no problem sending billions of dollars overseas, and they've got enough resources to ramp up a potential military intervention in Venezuela and Nigeria. Yeah, dangerous times. Definitely revving up, revving up. Maybe nothing will come from the Nigerian thing, but it seems like their pattern here is mention something, put it in your mind, and then escalate it to where even if you were opposed at the beginning, you end up supporting basically whatever these people say that they're going to do, or you end up supporting it even though you found out about it after they had already done it. Because at that point, you can't go back. You can't go back on your beliefs, right? That would make you look like one of those flip-floppers. It'd make you look like you don't know what you believe. It's a good thing to evolve in your beliefs, most especially if you're a nationalist collectivist. Collectivism is the problem. We need to give up that belief system. So we'll see what next week has to bring in this clown show. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and please like, subscribe, and share.